and welcome to episode 61 of Book Writing Tips, quick tips for new and seasoned authors, and I am your host, Alba Arango. Today's episode, and I do want to apologize, it is going to be a repost of episode 6. Only because this week I've had some family medical issues I have to deal with, and I just can't give the focus and concentration to this podcast or my revisions for that matter. I've had to put my revisions on hold as well. I want to be able to extend my full attention to the podcast, and since I can't do that this week, I am going to repost episode 6, which is about tips for writing dialogue, because that actually is something that all of us, myself included, can always use a refresher on. In fact, I'm going to need to listen to it myself because I am going to be doing revisions once this whole family stuff gets settled. And so, with no further ado, and I do apologize, I will have a new episode next week, hopefully. So stay tuned, relax, and let's talk about dialogue. Alrighty then. This episode will be in 2 parts as always. In the first part, I want to kind of focus on what characters say and how they say it. And in the second part, I want to talk about character tags, like how to identify which character is speaking. So let's start with part 1, what characters say and how they say it. Early in my career, when I first started having my pages read in front of a writer's group, I learned some things about my writing. One was, and the biggest critique I had was, that my 3 characters all sounded the same. Like you couldn't really tell like which character was speaking because they all 3 said kind of everything the same way. So one of the things I had to do is I had to go back through my whole book and kind of change up the way the kids spoke, because I don't want all my characters to sound the same. I want each character to have their own unique identity. So I went back and I, changed each of the 3 characters so that they sound differently. That way, if you're a reader and you're reading my books, hopefully you can identify which character is speaking, even if I didn't have a character tag. So that's kind of what you as an author want. You want each of your characters to be unique, to have their own way of speaking, and that way your readers can kind of start to see patterns in your character's speech, and they'd be able to identify which of your characters are speaking just by the words that are in the sentences. So kind of think about that as you're writing dialogue, that you want your characters to kind of talk differently. So let me give you a few different examples about what I mean. Children and adults speak differently. Children speak differently to each other than they do when they're speaking to adults, and adults speak differently to each other than when they are speaking to children. And that should be reflected in your writing. So if you have a child that's speaking to an adult, they're going to speak a certain way. And if you have this sort of disrespectful child character, then that kind of needs to be in there as well. I mean, you want your characters to be believable in your book. And if you're writing for children and you're writing children as characters, please, please, please be sure that you are making your characters sound like children. We had a couple authors in our writers group who were writing like young adult, and their characters are like 15 and 16, and they sounded like adults talking. Like if you were in like a water cooler at work, that's what the kids sounded like. And I was like, okay, I taught high school. I'm like, that is not how kids talk to each other at all. So just again, make sure your characters are believable. And if you're not around teenagers and you're writing young adult, you need to put yourself in a situation where you are around teenagers so that you can hear how they speak, so that can be reflected in your writing. And at the very least, if you're not around teenagers, then read a lot of YA books. So modern YA books, not YA books from like 50 years ago, because that's not how kids speak today. Read modern YA books so you can get yourself into the mindset of a teenager. In saying that about children, I know that perhaps in real life, There are children who maybe when speaking to each other use a lot of, say, profanity. And yes, I'm sure that is very, very true. I did teach for 25 years, so I know that to be true. But as a children's author, you have to be careful because what you are writing has to get through gatekeepers, meaning that you have teachers, parents, librarians who are going to frown if your characters in your book are using profanity all the time. It is considered taboo. So just kind of keep that in mind. And even if you're self-publishing, same thing, even though you don't have a publisher that's going to tell you it's taboo, you kind of need to know who you're writing to and who you're writing to get through. And I mean the gatekeepers. So kind of keep that in mind. Now, as far as adult fiction goes, obviously there are no gatekeepers in adult fictions. Adults buy their own books or buy them for each other, but kind of look at the genre that you write in and how people in your genre, successful authors in your genre, deal with things like profanity. Because what you will probably see is that not that it's completely taboo, because it's not, but it is limited. It is used in moderation. So, just kind of keep that in mind. Now, another example of when you're talking about characters interacting is that men and women speak differently to each other than they do to each other as a group. And what I mean by is if you have two men speaking, the words that they use, the way they speak to each other is going to be different than if a man is speaking with a woman. And I know you all know this to be true, but you kind of need to reflect that in your writing. So for example, if you have your two male characters talking and they're talking to each other and then a woman joins the group, like one of their wives joins the group, you know as a man that your language kind of changes. What you talk about kind of changes when a woman joins the group. And the same is true for ladies out there. When you're talking to each other and then one of your husbands joins a group, your conversation probably tends to shift a little bit. And kind of keep that all in mind when you're writing your story, because that should happen in your stories as well. And I am going to suggest, and this is again just a suggestion, but now is a time when if you're now writing, and this is new to you, it's time to start eavesdropping on conversations. And I know maybe that's rude, but if you're at work and you're in the lunchroom, just kind of listen to people's dialogue. Listen to how they speak to each other. Listen to about the way they say things. Go to the mall, sit down, have some lunch, and listen to how people are having conversations around you. Now, don't be creepy. Just, kind of eavesdrop, casually, just to hear how people speak to each other. Because you really want your characters to be realistic. And how characters interact with each other is an important part of your story. Okay, before we get to character tags, it's time for our crazy law/writing prompt. Our crazy law today comes from Carrizozo, New Mexico. So once a time in history, in Carrizozo, New Mexico, it is unlawful for either a man or a woman to go unshaven in public. Oh, that's your writing prompt. What could have happened to have made that into a law? All right, let's get back to our dialogue conversation. In part 2, I want to talk about character tags. And that is, how do you identify who is speaking in your story? So the most common way is, the he said and she said. And I will tell you, as a young author, I tried to get so creative. I mean, I literally, had a book, back in the day, a thesaurus, where I looked up the word said and tried to find other words I could use in place of said. I thought for sure that would just make me sound like such a professional author. I mean, I'm not going to use the word said over and over again. That's ridiculous. I'm going to get creative. And I came up with all of these different ways to say said for my character tags. And I will tell you, in the very first writers conference, I learned so much. Again, writers conferences, I can't say enough about them. We're going to do a whole podcast episode about them. But one of the seminars I went to, they were talking about dialogue and they talked about the word said. And I will tell you, I learned very quickly that apparently getting creative is something that publishers do not like. And I went back to the old he said, she said thing. And a few years ago, I will tell you, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was talking to a publisher. And we were just talking, and she was complaining about some of these new authors that she's getting, and they're doing that exact same thing, trying to be really creative. And she has to tell them, like, no, you don't understand. The word said is invisible. Like, as a reader, you just kind of gloss over it. You don't even notice it. And that's what you want as a writer. You want them to focus on your dialogue, not on your tag. The tag is just there to let the author know or the reader know who's speaking, but you don't want them to get distracted by the character tag. You want them to get distracted by the dialogue. So if you can make your tags as invisible as possible, that's better. Because what you want is for your reader to focus on the dialogue. So he said, she said is perfect because it's invisible. Having said that, if that's all you do for your tags, then now you're getting a little too, monotonous in your writing. So a good suggestion for this is to do action in place of writing he said or she said. So for example, if you have a phrase that says, "I can't believe you did that," Jenny said. "You're such a jerk." Okay, I've got Jenny said in the middle. That's a good way to identify who is speaking. Perfect. But another way you could do this, and this is a way to actually get more character development in your story as well. "I can't believe you said that." Jenny stomped her foot. "You're such a jerk." Now I made the tag an action scene, and now we get a little bit more insight into Jenny's character, and I kind of eliminated one of the said from my story while still having a tag. So it's an action tag, and those are awesome. However, again, a word of caution. If you use them all the time, constantly, like every single one is an action tag, once again, you've got this monotony going and it becomes almost a distraction. The key is moderation. You don't want to do any one kind of tag repeatedly over and over and over again constantly, but you want to have the sort of variety to kind of bring a little bit of diversity into your writing. Now, I could go on and on and on and on and on and on about dialogue, but I'm not going to. I will have other episodes where we delve into different aspects of dialogue. Again, this is just a quick sort of suggestions I'm giving you on when you're starting to write your dialogue, things to keep in mind. If you have some other suggestions about either character tags or how to make your characters sound different, please feel free to drop them in the comments. It's always good to get as many suggestions as we can on how to do things in your story. That's it for today, sweet and short. If you liked it, please give me a thumbs up or comment, or definitely subscribe so you keep seeing all these different book writing tips that I can possibly give. And I am always welcome to comments and suggestions on what you guys would like to see in this podcast. Thanks, you guys. I will see you all next week.